Prison Days, Book 1, June. Written by Simon King. Narrated by Todd Waites. June Introduction. I still remember the first moment I stepped into a prison. It was a cold autumn evening, and I was attending an information night. I'd only registered my interest a couple of days prior and was surprised at the speed of the next step in the process, a process I wasn't even entirely sure I wanted to pursue. We were all screened, scanned, given a pat-down, and led through into a tiny room, what's known as an airlock. Once there were a number of us, around a dozen or so, an officer showed us through a door and led us down a narrow walkway, high fences on either side, topped by razor wire. To say I wasn't intimidated would be a lie. I was shitting myself. We walked through another door into a large hall, which I would later find out to be the visit center. There were around 100 or so seats set up in the middle, of which I utilized one. No one spoke, and by the way everyone was sitting, I could tell it wasn't just me that was nervous. This was, after all, maximum security. After waiting for about 20 minutes, a tall gentleman took the podium before us, holding a microphone. He began speaking, the usual welcome, "This is who I am, this is what I do," kind of thing. His next sentence, however, nearly changed my mind. "It takes a very special type of person to work in corrections." My head was already full of a complete mixture of emotions, but that sentence sounded so cliched that I almost walked out right there. I've always been aware of sales pitches. I've worked in a sales job myself in the distant past and understood the path to a sale. The steps one took to ensure a handshake at the end of the presentation. Buttering up the customer was a good beginning, and this felt like buttery. At that moment, I felt as if this was the kind of interview where everybody was offered a role. But for some reason, I stayed. Something made me sit in that chair and wait. And now, all these years later, if I was to conduct a presentation to new prospective recruits, I believe my opening sentence would be the same. That working in corrections takes a very special type of person. Because it really does. If you are the kind of person that's easily offended, then don't try and become an officer. If you're someone to run away when a fellow officer is being attacked, then don't become an officer. If the words fuck, shit, cunt, and motherfucker offend you, then definitely don't become an officer. Because this world, this place behind the walls, is not what you imagined. The first time I entered a unit, housing some 50 prisoners, my heart was in my throat. We could hear the prisoners long before we entered through the airlock, and let me tell you, it was loud. They were screaming so many profanities at us that for some reason, it made us all wear these goofy grins. It felt weird. For me, it was a nervous grin, one I couldn't seem to stop. I remember feeling a lot of respect for the officers standing in the station towards the center of the unit's common area, dealing with this shit on a daily basis. Hindsight is funny sometimes, because I've spent many nights since in that very same unit, manning it by myself, alone, with only the company for 12 long hours being the TV. During our one and only guided tour, the officers took us to a second unit, one that left me shocked. What I had seen on TV and what I had imagined I would see were nothing compared to what was now before me. I had always imagined that maximum security meant maximum protection as well. For the officers to at least be safely housed behind thick glass and steel bars shielded from danger. There was no bulletproof glass. There were no cages or bars or even any form of separation from the prisoners. The unit we were standing in had 2 levels, each lined with cell doors numbering around maybe 40, running along the entire length of both sides. In the middle of the unit stood a raised platform with a step on one side that led into it. Around this raised platform was a circular desk with a countertop, maybe stomach height to me, with bookshelves and a computer screen sitting on the desk level. Once the prisoners were released from their cells, all 60 of them, the 3 officers on duty would stand or sit in this tiny officer station for the duration of their shift and perform their duties. There was zero protection if anything was to go pear-shaped. One of the officers taking us on this guided tour made an off-the-cuff remark that has stuck with me ever since. It is a remark that I have shared with new officers as well. "Just remember one thing. They decide whether you go home," he'd said to me. I left that information session numb. I had never experienced anything like it before. I had never been in trouble with the police, nor had anything to do with prison or anyone who had been to prison. I was literally fresh. Needless to say, I applied, and after about 3 months, began my career as a correctional officer. The experiences I've endured since can only be described as unbelievable. Things that happen behind these walls, sometimes on a daily basis, never make it to the outside. It's as if the world behind the walls is on another planet. The rules somehow change, those that do exist. The rapes, stabbings, assaults, they all really do exist and are to be expected. But it's the other things, the day-to-day experiences of prisoners just being prisoners and officers being officers, that make you shake your head in complete amazement. I mean, the first time you're confronted by a prisoner who doesn't get their own way and decides to bronze up by using feces, that's something that makes you think, why? To bronze up is a fancy term to describe a prisoner smearing their own shit all over themselves and their cell. But take my word for it, nothing will ever truly describe the experience of it. Or the first time you ask a prisoner to remove a shiv that they booted, as in, shoved up their rectum. It's those experiences that made me decide to write about them, to share them with you, so you can try and make your own mind up. I really do hope you find these entries interesting because it's not the sort of thing you hear about. My place of work is hidden, almost shielded from the outside world, and I would love to share just how brave my fellow officers are to turn up to work each day and endure these experiences, to risk everything. They truly are remarkable people. The following pages contain the experiences that I have witnessed and read about in subsequent reports. While some days might come across as mundane, others will certainly make you sit up and take notice. And that's one of the big attractions for correctional officers to the job. Every single day is different from all the rest. You never know what to expect. Some days might make for non-eventful reading, but to us, it just means everyone gets to go home safely, and that's what matters the most. I've tried my best to keep my opinions to a minimum, so as not to influence how you read each incident. I think to experience this type of environment for yourself, you really need to see it with unbiased eyes. So here it is, Max, as I have seen it. I hope you enjoy the ride. Now sit tight, hang on, and let me tell you about the day that was in a maximum security prison. Friday, June 1st. It was a relief shift for me today. I was working in Yarra North, which is classified as a protection unit. It houses 55 cells, some singles and some dual occupancy. Some of the prisoners that reside here include pedophiles, rapists, terrorists, informers, and those needing protection because they're too scared to be housed in a mainstream unit. I'm working with Sam and Ricky today, both permanently assigned here. One of the things that always amazes me when I work in this particular unit is just how clean it is. Most other units are trash, literally. They smell. They're dirty. The fridges are filled with rotten leftovers. Dirty washing is usually piled in the laundry area. Bins are either close to or already overflowing. And it seems there's a permanent stench of sour sweat that hangs in the air like a bad toilet spray. But not in Yarra North. It is clean. It even smells clean, thanks to the efforts of a couple of long-termers. As an officer, It's definitely something you appreciate. As I said, both of my fellow officers call this place home, and because it's their normal place of work, makes the day that much easier. A fourth officer, Anthony, is the shipping officer today. He will be in and out of the unit most of the day. His main duty to ship protection prisoners around the prison to where they're needed. This includes the medical wing for appointments, the admissions area for transport to court and other jails, or to the official functions area the crooks call Centerlink, named after a government department that handles welfare payments. It's 7:10 a.m. when I entered the unit. Unlock happens after morning muster is called correct by the control room. After putting my belongings away, I wait for another officer so we can go door to door, or trap to trap, the small latch that opens in the middle of each cell door. Operational standing orders requires us to carry a ligature knife in case we find what's known as a swinger, a prisoner that has hung himself through the night. Unfortunately, suicide is a reality in this place, so you have to be prepared for it at all times. Sam Howell, a veteran of 5 years and a personal friend of mine, enters the unit 5 minutes later, and after a few moments of pleasantries, we begin our muster. We count the entire bottom deck without incident, during which time our third officer arrives, Ricky Roberts, a fresh officer from the last intake. She has been in the unit since she finished her entry course, and I've heard good things about her. Confident, which counts for a lot. Sam and I continue to go trap to trap. All prisoners are friendly enough, some giving us a good morning as we peer in through the trap. It pays to return the pleasantries, regardless of their crime. The last thing we want is a shit bomb in the face because a crook took offense at you for not returning his good morning. And yes, shit bombs are very much a reality. We continue up to the top deck and can already hear some sort of altercation behind door number 1. We pause for a moment to make sure we have the right cell and can hear a muffled argument. So, drop the trap. The first thing that hits me is the smell. Fresh, pure shit. What's going on, I say, but I already know the issue. I can smell it. An unspoken rule in prison is, if you share your cell, you don't shit during lockdown. Watson, one of the 2 prisoners in 32, had broken the cardinal rule. He'd only been in the unit for 3 days, and I guess the rules hadn't been fully explained. The small cut to his right eye told me that school was definitely in session. Pompanelli, get away from him. Come to the door and put your hands through the trap. Fuck, boss. Can you smell that shit? I fucking told him not to. It fucking stinks in here, he yelled, glaring at his cellmate. Robert, are you okay? I asked. He nodded his head but was clearly scared. Sam, come to the trap and I'll get you out of there. Just put your hands through, man. Have to cuff you, I said, holding the bracelets up. He nodded, stepping towards the door. Cracking a cell before count correct wasn't allowed without a supervisor present, and as the crooks had been fighting, I looked at my offsider, who now called the code Foxtrot, prisoner-on-prisoner fight. Code Foxtrot, Yara North, prisoners contained. Adding the prisoners contained part saves the mad dash of officers racing to the unit to render assistance, and is something fellow officers and supervisors appreciate. Pompanelli complies with my instruction and puts his hands through the trap. Given the stink in the cell, fresh air would be his first priority. I cuff him and ask him to remain where he is. 30 seconds later, officers begin to come through the door, followed by the duty supervisor. I begin filling the soup in, and he motions for the cell door to be cracked. Pompanelli exits the cell, and we walk him to the end of the top-tier corridor. The soup enters the cell and talks to Watson. He appears okay, but the cut above his eye looks nasty, and we wait for the medical staff to arrive. When they do, they assess him and ask us to escort the prisoner to the medical wing. We would find out later that Watson sustained a fractured eye socket, concussion, and a fractured jaw. It wasn't just a one-punch incident, it turns out. Pompanelli is moved to one of 4 management units, called Murray Unit. He complies with all instructions, and the move is complete within 10 minutes. He's a long-termer, in for incest and rape, and to him, the move to Murray Unit only means he gets to enjoy a single cell. He is already serving a 15-year sentence, so having an assault charge added, where the most he will probably receive is 6 months concurrently, isn't going to affect him too much. If anything, he has a win by the move to the new unit. We continue our count once the soup has left, and Control finally calls count correct at 8:05, some 25 minutes late. Due to prison rules, a late unlock means a late lockup tonight. We proceed to unlock the unit, key and door style, and return to the officer station. Now, if you're picturing a cozy officer station behind bulletproof glass, safely segregated from the unit population, then I have some grim news. The officer stations in this prison are just circular desks on a raised platform with a gap in one side for access. If a prisoner wanted to enter the station, they could literally just walk in. There isn't even a little gate to close the station. You're susceptible to assault, shit bombs, spitting, and hot watering. The second-floor tier is close enough that if a prisoner wanted to piss on an officer, he wouldn't have to strain too hard. For a maximum security prison, it has zero protection for the officers. The prisoners begin to exit their cells, voices now rising, a hive of activity around the toasters. 10 minutes later, the medical trolley arrives for morning medications. I put out the call over the unit intercom. Yara North, first call for morning meds. A line begins to form out the front of the med window, the nurse preparing for the onslaught. One at a time, they front the little window with their ID cards. Some are polite to the nurse, some are not. Some demand minor pain relief on top of their normal meds, and more often than not, are granted their request. Each prisoner takes their medication, swallows it with a cup of water, then presents their open mouth to an officer for inspection. Diverting medication is a very common problem, and officers need to be vigilant when performing this role. Standovers for medication are a daily occurrence in almost every unit. The pills can be traded for drugs, sexual favors, or anything of value. Today, the morning med run goes without a hitch. I sit at the computer and finish my report for the supervisor about the code Foxtrot from that morning. I also check my emails and note that we have 2 prisoners that are departing the prison for an alternative one. Transfers are very common and happen almost daily. There's also one internal transfer. The required prisoners are buzzed up and informed of their moves. All but one seems okay with it and walks back to their cell to pack their gear up. Only one grumbles and puts up a little resistance, but he too complies after a minute or so. Keeping your cool and remaining calm are much better options than demanding, confronting, and getting upset. It could mean the difference between a good outcome and an assault on a staff member. Officers only have their mouth and ears to rely on, and they must learn quickly how to utilize them. The morning passes without incident, and before you know it, the announcement comes over the speakers that it's 10 minutes until lunchtime muster. We wait another 5 minutes and then announce for the unit to stand by their cells for count. Prisoners make their way back to their cell doors and quietly wait. It is in their best interest to remain quiet, as lunch is served immediately after Control calls the count correct. One officer grabs the unit muster sheet and begins to walk from cell to cell. The other 2 officers stand in the middle of the unit and begin counting to themselves. It is one of the things you do not want to get wrong. For one thing, if your numbers don't match the other 2 officers, then you have to recall the prisoners to their cells a second time. The other reason is, if count is called incorrect and your unit was the cause, the rest of the prison has a way of finding out, and they will certainly let you know about it. Plus, to make it really interesting, you have the added benefit of the report to write as well. The unit is silent as we prepare ourselves to count the numbers. Ricky volunteers to take the muster board around. Female officers are common and are a very good asset. They're prone to shutting down incidents quickly and firmly. We have quite a number at this prison, some young, some old, but all valued. As Ricky begins her rounds, one prisoner makes a remark and his cellmate snickers as she passes them. I clear my throat, make eye contact with them, and they look away, still grinning. Disrupting a muster can carry consequences. Penalties can hurt, such as a loss of TV for a night or two, or a week, depending on the severity. Ricky finishes her count, looks at us, and we give her the nod. "Break off," she says sternly. We leave her be as she adds up her numbers. I show my piece of paper to Sam, and thankfully our numbers match. A minute or two later, Ricky approaches me and quietly whispers, 54? I nod in agreement. Control calls for muster numbers, and we call ours in. 20 minutes later, count is called correct, and the afternoon begins. Shortly after 2 p.m., there's a call over the radio. Code Mike, Tambo. Our fourth officer, who is sitting in one of the offices reading a newspaper, decides to attend and lend a hand. He rushes out the door. We find out later that it was a chest complaint, and the crook was taken to the medical unit. The afternoon medical run enters the unit at 4:30 p.m., and Ricky puts the call out. Yara North, first call for afternoon medication. The prisoners begin to line up, and I decide to stand in the cubicle and check mouths. It was going so well until an old crook, a small Italian with a fiery temper, gets to the window. He has forgotten his ID card, and when the nurse asks for it, begins yelling at her. "You fucking know who I am, bitch. Just give me my fucking pills." He looks at me, hoping for some support. "Come on, boss. She knows me. You can tell her." I see one of my offsiders begin to stand at the officer station, ready to come to my aid if needed. "You know the rules, Bruno. No ID card, no pills. You've been here long enough." He bangs on the window of the nurse's medical cubicle, and she looks startled. Another crook, a big lad of about 6'3", murmurs under his breath. "Bruno, fuck off, mate. You're holding up the line." A couple of other prisoners also begin to mutter, and Bruno begins to walk away. "Fuck the lot of you," he whispers as he walks back to his cell. There are two things you never want to get in the way of when it comes to prisoners: their pills and their meals. They don't want to be standing there any longer than they need to. The rest of the medication round went without incident, and we completed the 5 o'clock muster soon after. Once the count was called correct, I buzzed Bruno up to the officer station. I couldn't let the verbal abuse of the nurse go, and he would know that too. He approached, and I asked him how he was. "Everything okay?" He shrugged and held his palms up, gesturing that he was so-so. "The nurse didn't deserve that, Bruno. You know better. You also know the rules, and abusing a nurse isn't on." "I know, boss. I just forgot my card, and she's seen me every day for how long now? I just got fucking frustrated. It's my grandkid's birthday today. I'll apologize when I see her next. I'm sorry, boss." "I understand you're sorry, but you know I can't let this go. I'll have a chat to the soup when he's in and see what he wants to do. Just don't take it out on the nurse, mate. It's not her fault. She has rules she needs to follow as well." "I understand, boss. I'm sorry." He retreats to his cell, and a couple of other crooks mutter profanities as he walks past. It's a small thing and doesn't go much further. The soup agrees that it can be handled in-house, and Bruno loses his TV for a night. He surrenders it voluntarily, and the situation is closed. It was a good result for everyone. Just before dinner, we receive a phone call that a new transfer is waiting for us in the admissions building. Our fourth officer is currently out, so I volunteer to go and get them. As I enter the building, there's a loud banging coming from one of the many cells. The echoes boom through the corridors as a prisoner is kicking the shit out of the thick metallic door of his holding cell. I go and see the officer in charge and am told my prisoner is the one kicking the door. I open the trap window and see it's a returned regular, Jameson. He sees me and begins grinning. "Hi, boss," he smirks. "Giving the guys here a hard time, Stephen?" I asked. "Just letting them know I'm still here, boss." "I doubt they can forget with your communication skills." The last time Stephen Jameson was in Yarra North, he was caught providing the unit with substantial oral satisfaction in return for medication. He's a regular, often busted for drugs and small-time stuff. His favorite pastime is trading sexual favors for drugs. I knew that having him back in the unit would not make things easier. I prepare to take him back to the unit. In our prison, there is an area right outside the admissions building that every prisoner walks through when heading from one particular unit to another area. It's called the quadrangle and contains a total of 13 gates and doors, and to take a protection prisoner through, this area requires clearance. Some of the gates lead into compounds, while others into buildings. I radio the officer in charge of the area, and he tells me to stand by. I wait. I see one of my mates walk past and tip him a wave. He waves back, sees my escorted prisoner, and rolls his eyes, smiling. I fully understand his gesture. "Yarra North, make your move," the voice says over the radio. I open the door and wave Stephen through. As he enters the quadrangle, the heckling from two of the gates begins. They're mainstream compounds, and the prisoners there despise protection crooks. "Hurry the fuck up, you rat," one yells. "Boneyard dog, bring him in here, boss. We'll take care of him. Come on, boss," the other joins in. Stephen looks at them and batters his eyelids. He grins and grabs his crotch. I shudder at the thought of what would happen if they got hold of him. There wouldn't be much left. The unit houses some very large Pacific Islander prisoners, and they're not known for their gentle dispositions. I hurry Stephen along and we enter Yarra North compound. A couple of crooks are walking the perimeter path and start running over when they see my escort. "Hey dude, you're back," one says, and by his smile, I know what he is thinking. Stephen replies with a hug for one, then the other. A third gets a fist bump. "I'll come out after. Just need to get my shit sorted first. Wait here. Is Jerry still here?" he asked, Jerry being his previous cellmate. "Nah, he got shifted to PFPP last month." PFPP is a prison specifically designed for protection prisoners, located some 3 hours from the city. We make our way to the unit and enter through the airlock. Cheers immediately erupt as they see the new arrival. It's almost like a homecoming, and I wonder to myself where the deterrence is with prison life. Ricky greets Stephen and begins the induction interview. A bed pack is waiting for him, consisting of a blanket, a pillow, 2 sheets, plastic bowl, plate, and cup. He also receives a TV. He is assigned a cell, sharing with Anton, an illegal Spanish immigrant who's finishing his sentence for drug trafficking before his deportation. It's not a pairing I would have suggested, but there was a bed shortage and cell choice was limited. Stephen takes his items and heads for his cell on the upper tier. One crook takes his bag for him, his hope for a reward clearly on his face. 4 other crooks follow, and they all pile into the cell to greet their new arrival. "Attention all stations, 10 minutes till lockup," the speakers bark across the prison. Prisoners hurriedly rush back and forth between cells, kitchen, hot water urn, microwave, desperate to tie off loose ends before their nighttime lockdown. There are hugs, fist bumps, and shouts of, "Catch you tomorrow, bro." Ricky again takes control of the muster board, and I lock the cells behind her, wishing each prisoner a good night. When I get to Stephen and Anton's cell, I see Anton not looking very impressed. It's an issue I know will need to be addressed tomorrow. 10 minutes later, the control room confirms that count is correct, and we head for the exit. Any day that you can walk out of a prison under your own steam at the end of a shift is classed as a win. Today was a good day. Sunday, June 3rd. Called in for overtime. If you make yourself available, then the reward is double pay for the day. I was offered a number of different placings, but chose to return to Yarra North when offered that position. I wanted to see how Anton was and if staff had sorted out the sleeping arrangements from my previous shift in there. I was in a bit late due to being called at late notice. Sam was already conducting the morning trap muster with another overtime officer who wasn't normally in this unit, but a unit officer just the same, a man named Pete. I didn't really know him as he was fairly new, and we shook hands when they completed count. Sam gave me a fist bump and rolled his eyes. "You missed a doozy yesterday, man. Steven tried to rub Anton up during the night, and Anton decked him. One of the adjoining cells buzzed control, and Steven got taken to the hospital with a fractured jaw. No gobbies for him for a while," he chuckled. "And Anton?" I asked. "Taken to Murray. He isn't happy, though. One of the officers there said Anton had sworn to kill the stupid fag when he sees him. I don't think their friendship will ever really begin. I somehow doubt Anton will come back here." It's common practice to flag prisoners on the system if and when they have issues with certain prisoners. It is a very in-depth system that keeps track of gang affiliation, drug debts, or just plain hatred towards someone else. Once you're flagged, it pops up every time you transfer to the jail. Steven and Anton would now be flagged from each other. It's the same for different bikie gangs, drug dealers, and those in danger from them for debts or just simple differences. As prison officers, we have a duty of care to every prisoner, regardless of crime, race, or sexual orientation. And a lot of the time, we have to protect them from each other. A short time later, count is called correct and we unlock all the cells. Returning to the officer station, I check my emails and the unit muster for any new names in the unit. All appeared clear. Nothing exciting in the emails other than a couple of hellos, as well as a couple of requests from officers wanting to swap shifts with someone. I check the dates and am able to offer a swap for the 14th of July. I wasn't working and didn't have much planned. I was hoping for the 8th off and so put forth my proposition. As I press send on the email, the intercom goes off next to my ear. I answer the call. "Boss, I need help." I checked the muster and saw the cell was occupied by 2 prisoners, both in their very early 20s and both quite small in stature from memory. "What's up, Jack?" I asked. "Could you come to our cell, please? I don't feel safe coming out or talking over this thing." "Be right there," I responded. This didn't sound good. I looked at Sam and he flipped me a thumbs up as I stood to venture upstairs. It's good practice not to appear to make a beeline for a cell, as it can be interpreted as someone wanting to lag, and laggers were not too popular in prison. Instead, I took the long way around. We were required to take a number of tier walks throughout the day anyway, so slowly walking around the unit wasn't seen as anything out of the ordinary. It's also quite common for prisoners to give each other a heads up when officers were out sniffing. Calls of "ducks on the pond" were common. I climbed the stairs and peered into a couple of cells, saying hello and making my presence known. When I reach cell 29, I peer in and repeat my greeting. The 2 occupants look quite sheepish, one sitting on a pillow, the other standing against the back wall. "What's going on, guys?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. Maintaining awareness of your surroundings is important, given the environment we work in, so I try not to enter too far into the cell without backup. "Dobson attacked us last night before lockdown," one of them says, sheepishly looking at the ground. He's the younger of the 2, sitting on the pillow, his voice sounding distant. "What do you mean attacked? Did he hit you?" There didn't appear to be any facial injuries, but that didn't mean an attack didn't take place. "He raped us. Both of us," the other one said, tears filling his eyes. "Both of you? Like, at the same time?" Unfortunately, rape was a reality in prison and often went unreported. but 2 rapes at the same time by a single perpetrator is not something you hear of every day. Yes, he held me by the throat while he raped Jack, and then he made him sit on the floor while he raped me. He held a shiv to my stomach whilst he did it. Tears began streaming down his face, the shame clearly visible in his eyes. "Did you tell anyone last night before lockdown?" I asked. I know that Shane Roberts was in the unit the previous day. He's a 20-year veteran with a care factor of 0. He cares as much about crooks as he did about his appearance. A prisoner once asked if he was homeless due to his lack of personal hygiene. If Roberts conducted the cell lockups, there's no way he would have said anything to anyone, given the fact he was about to go home. We tried to tell Officer Roberts, but he didn't want to listen. He said to talk to the day staff today, Jack said, clearly scared out of his brain. I was pissed. I knew what Roberts would have said. Unfortunately, it's not what you know, but who you know. How that guy still had a job was beyond my comprehension. But when you've been around for 20 years, you tend to know people. I'll lock you guys in and get the soup here. Do you need the doctor? I'm bleeding from my arse, Jack replied, and Pete nodded in agreement. Okay, guys, leave it with me. Just sit tight. I'll lock your cell door so no one can get in. Won't be long. I close the cell and lock it up. As I return to the officer's station, Dobson walks past me, wearing a wide Cheshire grin. Morning, boss, he quips. Morning, Jason, I reply. He continues past me, almost gloating. I take out my radio. Yarra North 1 to Soup 8? Send. The reply is immediate. Can you please call the unit? I reply, and before I'm able to sit down, the phone rings. Supervisor Bruce Stevens is a really good person to have on your side. He is fair and will back up his team without questions, if need be. I fill him in on what's happened, minus the bit about Officer Roberts for the time being. He listens without interrupting, and when I'm done, suggests to have both boys moved to the medical wing for the time being. I agree. I speak to Sam and ask him to help me move Dobson to his cell. He obliges, and together we approach Dobson. He understands before we even speak, his grin never faltering. We follow him to his cell and lock him down without incident. I then unlock the 2 boys and escort them to the medical wing. They're shy and quiet, and when we walk through the quadrangle, the jeering from the mainstreamers fall on deaf ears. One of the boys is even limping slightly, clearly in pain. We enter the medical unit, and I escort them to a holding cell. A doctor sees them 5 minutes later, and both are cleared of internal injuries. Just tearing and soreness, which will heal by itself in a few days. I don't know whether either of the boys has thought of it, but I wonder if Dobson has passed any diseases on. For an officer, all prisoners are treated equally. We always assume they are infected with something, so always wear gloves and other protective gear as needed. We don't take chances. We know some do have diseases, but not which ones, so we proceed as if they all have something contagious. Between the prison sex, rapes, needle sharing, etc., spreading diseases is all too common. Next, I move both prisoners to the admissions wing, where I can assist the soup with interviewing them. Police will be called as well, as they will also need to conduct their own investigation. I lock the boys into separate cells and wait for the supervisor. I hang out with a couple of friends who work in the admissions area, catching up with the gossip of the day. I find out one of the officers working in industries had been walked off-site as they were caught smoking cigarettes. The scary part isn't the fact that they were caught smoking, but that they smuggled cigarettes into the prison. If they were able to smuggle cigarettes in, what else had they smuggled in? And did they share them with prisoners? It's an alarming thought. When things go pear-shaped, other officers were the ones you relied on to watch your back, to jump in and help and to protect you just like you would protect them. The dangers in this place are astronomical, so having a dirty officer just dampens the trust you have and need for your fellow workers. I have zero sympathy for the person. I hope they don't return." The supervisor comes into the room and beckons me over. We shake hands and I fill him in on what's happened. He listens intently, then asks me to go grab the first prisoner, which I do. Jack sits at the desk, his eyes never meeting the soup or mine. "Tell me what happened," the soup begins. Jack waits a long time before answering. I almost say something, but then he begins. "Me and Pete were in our cell with Jason, playing cards. We were playing for bottles of Coke. I'd been winning, and Jason was getting pissed. After I won the last hand, he threw the cards off the bed and grabbed me by the throat. He pulled a shiv out of his shorts and pointed it at Pete. He said he wanted to have some real fun, and if either of us said anything, he would stick us with it. He said he knew where we lived and our family would cop it when he gets out. He then smacked me in the head with a shiv handle and told me to drop my pants." His voice was beginning to crack, quietly fading. When he finished with me, he grabbed Pete and did the same to him. Pete was crying and I could see blood running down his leg. "Did either of you tell the staff that we're on duty?" the soup asked. "We tried, but the officer didn't want to do anything then. One said it was too late as everyone was going home and we should wait for the staff that came in the morning, which we did." I could see the questions in Bruce's eyes. I was guessing he was feeling the same frustration I was when hearing the bit about Robert's refusal of help. He had not only ignored a serious assault on 2 prisoners, but he also put the morning staff at risk. Anything could have happened when the unit was unlocked that morning. Jason could have repeated the act, assaulted them, or worse, tried to shut them up for good. He put staff and prisoners at risk for no other reason than laziness. "Okay, Jack, thank you. The police will be contacted shortly, and you will likely need to give them a statement." Bruce looked at me, and I ushered Jack back to his holding cell. I returned with Pete, and the story was the same. After a few minutes of questioning, I returned Pete to his holding cell and returned to Bruce. He looked at me, his eyes angry. Why the fuck would he ignore that? The first thing those boys will tell the police is that they told staff. We're going to look like fucking gooses when this gets out. I nodded, understanding perfectly that this would not be just a simple in-house matter. This could cost jobs, an external investigation at the very least. "Thank you, Kingy. Leave the boys here. I'll deal with things for now. Just go back to your unit for the time being." "And Dobson?" I asked. He would need to be separated, especially from the unit. If some of the guys caught wind of what happened, it could lead to the situation getting worse. "Leave him locked down for now," he replied. I nodded and headed back to Yarra North. When I arrived back in the unit, there's a group of prisoners, maybe half a dozen, standing around the officer's station. Sam is talking to them, but the crooks sound upset. It would seem that the secret wasn't so secret after all. The irony is that a unit filled with mostly sex offenders are upset at a sex offender for committing a sex offense. I walk over and ask them to quiet down. "Is he going to stay here, boss?" one asked, "because I can't guarantee his safety if he does." I swallow the urge to laugh. The one speaking is about 70 years old and precarious on his feet. A stiff breeze would send him airborne. "It's okay, Harry. Guys, is locked down and the soup is looking into it. Once he's finished, he'll decide the next step. For the time being, just stay away from Dobson's door and get on with your day." A couple of them turn and head for the chook pen, the outside courtyard where they can walk or sit or just take in the sunshine. Another heads for the kitchen. One stays, lowering his voice. "I saw the boys try and tell the staff yesterday, but they didn't want to listen. I could see them from my joint." "Okay, Harry. Please, just wait for the soup to do his thing." He gives in and returns to his cell. Sam gives me a look of disgust. "Is it true? Did they ignore them last night?" "It appears so, mate. Fucking idiots were in too much of a rush to get home, I replied, trying to sound calm. Inside, I was fuming. It's almost midday muster by the time Bruce phones. The police had been and taken statements. He was sending the tactical squad to come and escort Dobson to a management unit. I buzz Dobson on the intercom and tell him the good news. Good for us. Pack your stuff, Jason. You're headed to another unit. There's a muffled grunt, and then a barrage of swearing spews out from the intercom speaker. Fuck that, boss. I didn't do nothing. Those fags attacked me first, and I didn't touch them. I'm not going. Tell those motherfuckers that I'm not going. Your escort will be here in 5 minutes. I hope you'll be ready. He only had two choices, and neither one to his benefit. They would either escort him walking or escort him by carrying him. His choice. He begins to say something else, but I break the connection before he has a chance to finish. He can take it up with the tactical boys now. 5 minutes later, 6 rather large lads and 2 ladies enter the unit. The uniforms they wear speak volumes and are a good deterrent. The uniforms also convey a message. One very clear message. Don't fuck with us. They ask where he is, and I point to the cell door containing Dobson. They climb the stairs, and one slowly opens the trap. He speaks quietly, and I can hear Dobson fire up. He isn't a stupid prisoner. He's done serious time and knows what the drill is. Fighting these guys would be useless. And when his hands come through the trap to be cuffed, I know that he has seen the light. I make my way up and ensure his things are packed. They lead him down the stairs to a chorus of jeers and abuse from the rest of the unit. He grins again, but doesn't retaliate. He is led out of the unit carrying his bag, and the unit goes quiet once they have left. Sam yells to me that I have a phone call, and I head down. Simon, it's Bruce. Can you arrange for the property of these 2 to be bagged and brought down to admissions, please? They're both heading into town for a bit. Sure thing. Do it now. I don't ask questions. Sometimes it's best to just let things take their course. No doubt, they will be taken to another jail and be re-interviewed about the incident. The entire incident. I get Sam to help me pack their gear up and take the bags down to admissions. I know we will be hearing a lot more about this incident in the coming weeks. I return to the unit, and the rest of the day is routine. A couple of medical codes are called throughout the prison, but that's about all. I look forward to home time and quietly cheer when it finally arrives. Monday, June 4th. Today I was rostered in the visitor center. It is used by both mainstream and protection prisoners, but at alternating times to avoid mixing. There is a total of 6 officers working in this area. 3 officers work in the visits room, and 3 officers are preparing prisoners for their visits. It is one of 3 main sources of contraband introduction, so vigilance is required both before and after a visit with in-depth strip searches. The preparation of prisoners is normally conducted by male officers due to the stripping aspect of the area. It is also the area I prefer to work when here. Not for the stripping aspect, but more for the fact the role doesn't have a lot of contact with the public. I prefer to deal directly with the prisoners. The 2 other officers working with me are both normal visit center officers and have over 5 years of experience. We shake hands, decide on our roles, and wait for the first prisoners to arrive. Our list shows that we have 14 mainstream visits before 12 p.m., then 11 protection visitors between 1 p.m. and 3 p.m., and finally 8 mainstream visits between 4 p.m. and 5:30 p.m. 31 visits for the day is not too bad. It can get very busy in this area, and it is not uncommon to process 60 to 70 prisoners in a shift. 9 o'clock comes around and the first prisoners arrive. 3 from Tambo East stroll into the room and we check their ID cards. They select the correct size overalls they will wear during their visit, which, once fitted, have the zipper cable tied shut to reduce the ability to conceal anything. We take them into small side rooms and begin the stripping process. The first crook I strip hands me his jumper, tracksuit pants, and t-shirt, which I put aside to put in a locker. He takes off his watch as well. He hands me his shoes, which I search thoroughly, then his socks. He hands me his underwear, which I search and put on the bench. The prisoner then, upon instruction, opens his mouth and runs his fingers around his gum line. He lifts his tongue. He holds his hands up and spreads his fingers. He lifts his arms to have his armpits checked. He then separates his penis from his scrotum, and also lifts his scrotum. He then turns around and lifts each foot behind him to show me the bottom of each foot. He then bends and spreads his butt cheeks. Unfortunately, it is the perfect pocket to hide things. This process of stripping will be repeated with every prisoner that enters and leaves the visits area. The first 3 are finished being processed and wait in the sitting room, ready for a front officer to take them through. There are 2 main reasons for flare-ups in this area. One is when time is up. It has been known for prisoners to not want to end visits and can get upset when officers let them know when it's time to wrap things up. But the most volatile flare-up that can happen is when a contact visit is changed to a boxed visit at the last moment. One reason a visit may be changed to a box visit is if the visitor scans positive for an illicit substance while making their way through the prison's reception area or front door. If they scan positive and nothing is found during a strip search, then the visit becomes a boxed visit. If a visitor needs to use the bathroom facilities during a visit, then a visit can also be changed to a boxed one. People are born with built-in pockets, and unfortunately, these pockets are not allowed to be searched as such. So if the visitor visits the bathroom, then the contact visit is revoked. We process another 8 mainstreamers during the next couple of hours and also have a couple of no-shows. A code mic is called at about 11:45 a.m. in a protection unit, and it's a prisoner with chest pains. The morning quickly becomes afternoon with very little drama. Once lunchtime muster is called correct, we begin calling the protection prisoners up for their visits. The first one through the door is a grinning Stephen Jameson. "Hi, boss," he says, sporting a black eye and a bruise on the right side of his face. "How's the face?" I ask. "It's okay. I'll be back to normal in no time," he says. Another officer takes Stephen for his strip and I take over the book. Every unit and area within the jail has a book that is kept up to date by one officer. It keeps track of movements in and out of the area, so any muster or emergency count that is conducted can be relied on for up-to-date information. It can be high pressure when there are a lot of moves, but in this area, the book is a breeze when kept on top of. "Code Alpha, Thompson East. Code Alpha, weapon." The call pierces the air and everyone jumps. The other 2 officers are tied up with prisoners, so I race out the door and begin the run to Thompson East. It is amazing to see officers pour out of units and areas surrounding the quadrangle, with some manning gates to allow other officers a straight run-through. You never know what will greet you when you run into a Code Alpha, especially one involving a weapon. Your first priority is the safety of yourself and fellow officers. I see officers ahead of me enter the unit. There are officers in front and behind me, and we reach the unit door together, the doors held open by more officers. As we enter the unit, I see a group of prisoners congregated on the top tier, looking and laughing at a group of officers in the far corner of the unit. There appears to be a prisoner pinned on the floor, a broom lying nearby. To prevent a larger flare-up, the best thing for spare officers to do is to lock the unit down. I head for the stairs. "Lockdown, guys," I yell. "Now!" I go to the nearest cell and usher a couple of prisoners inside and lock them in. Other officers begin to do the same. There's some protests, but everyone eventually complies. Within a couple of minutes, all prisoners are locked in cells. They may not be in their own cells, but for the safety of officers, everyone is locked up. The first responders have the prisoner detained on the floor and are questioning him, trying to ascertain what happened. He apparently began screaming about court, then started hitting the officer's station with a broom. None of the officers were hurt, and they called the code quite quickly. The code is stood down and the prisoner is escorted to Murray. I return to the visits area to continue with my duties there. I barely make it in the door when Code Alpha Medical comes across the radio. I turn and run towards the medical wing, a short distance away. Prisoner contained is followed, and I breathe a sigh of relief. The medical wing has a tendency for Code Alphas due to both mainstream and protection prisoners being in such close proximity to each other. They're all locked away behind Perspex windows, but can see each other clearly, so a lot of burning goes on. It is very common for a mainstreamer to start banging on the Perspex to wind a protection prisoner up. This time, the overzealous crook is a protection prisoner, giving it back to the mainstreamers. He's a large lad of 25, named Vandenberg. The tactical team are already escorting him next door to the admissions wing and their ample cells to cool off for a bit. He doesn't resist, which is a smart move, considering 6 tactical officers have hold of him. I see a mate, Shane, and he gives me a nod. This time, I make it back to visits and continue processing prisoners. A couple of prisoners are just finishing their visits and coming back into the rear receiving area. I signal one to enter the strip room so I can check him. I unclip his overalls and notice a tear down one side of his leg. "When did that happen?" I ask him. He looks, shrugs, and mumbles something. I sense his defenses go up and ready myself for anything. He takes his overalls off and I check them, tossing them into the dirty washing tub. He takes off his shoes and hands them to me. Whilst I check them, he quickly removes his socks and jocks, then does the dance, tongue, arms, fingers, pits, balls, and turns, all in one motion. I know that he's trying to cover something, so beckon for him to wait. "At my pace, yeah? Just wait." He glares at me, raising his arms in a "what" gesture. I finish with his shoes and ask for his socks and underwear, which he half throws at me. I make eye contact with him and he knows. The clothes all check out, and I gesture for him to show me his mouth. He opens and rolls his tongue around. I signal for his hands and he tries to run away with the sequence once more, so once again, I gesture for him to slow down. "Come on, boss. Want to get back to the unit," he mumbles. He lifts his scrotum and penis, and that's when I see a flash of white. He tries to turn, but I've spotted what he's trying to conceal. My insides are cringing at the thought of what I'm about to find. "Turn around, man. Show me your dick." He turns and holds his penis up, pointing at me. There, peering out from the eye of his penis, was the top of a syringe. A small one, but a syringe nonetheless. He had jammed it down his shaft, but unfortunately, size acted against him. His member just wasn't long enough. Size really does matter. I do a double cringe and motion for the spotting officer to have a look. He does, and his eyes nearly roll out of their sockets. "Dude, seriously? How the fuck did you get that in there?" he asks, trying to hide the grin. "Take it out and hand it to me, please," I say, holding out my gloved hand. He groans, huffs, and puffs a couple of times, then sees my offsider with his radio already in his hand, ready to call a code if need be. "Fine, fuck," he yells as he slowly withdraws the syringe from its little hideaway. I take the syringe and let him get dressed. "Soup will be in touch, man," I say. We lock him in a holding cell and notify the duty supervisor. Once the evidence is bagged and tagged, we continue to process prisoners. The duty sup drops by some 20 minutes later and advises the crook that he will be charged. He is let out and returns to his unit. For us, the last 4 prisoners are a no-show, so we have a relaxing last hour. talking shit and having a couple of laughs about penis size. A good couple of laughs. Down the eye of his dick, I think to myself, cringing all over again. As we head out to the exit, after count is called correct, I bump into Bruce the soup. Ask him how things are going with the shit from the day before, and he rolls his eyes. "That dog will come to bite us soon enough, mate," he says. I know what he means and leave it behind for another day. I tell him about Syringe Boy, and he laughs. It has been a good day. Thursday, June 7th. There are some days you wish you had just stayed in bed. Today was one of those days. I came into the news that 3 officers had been hurt in an attack yesterday. All were taken to hospital by ambulance, and fortunately, 2 had been released later in the day. The officers were working in Tambo East when a large islander decided he wanted to bail out of the unit. He had words with the unit supervisor earlier in the day and didn't get his way. Turns out, he really wanted out of the unit and figured beating up 3 officers would be the best option. He was transferred out of the prison immediately, as is standard practice when assaulting an officer, and has since been taken to another maximum security prison nearby. The only good thing is that any assault on an officer also carries a mandatory increase in sentence. One of the assaulted officers had only just commenced his career at the prison, and it also happened to be his very first shift in that unit, which he had been offered on a permanent basis. I truly hope all 3 officers have a speedy recovery and return to work as soon as they feel able to. No one ever deserves to be assaulted, and everyone deserves to go home to their families at the end of a workday. I was required to work in the admissions area of the prison today. It was my first time in there, and very eye-opening. The admissions area is probably one of the busiest areas when in full swing. When it's quiet, it's the most boring. The other thing that you need to understand about the admissions unit is that you see a lot of naked men. If you have an issue with naked men, then don't ever put your hand up for that unit. The shift starts quite early in the morning, and about 40 prisoners need to be processed and made ready for pickup so they can attend court. Nearly half the population in this prison is on remand, therefore still need to attend court. And if 40 prisoners go out, then most of the 40, if not all, will return. That means stripping them on the way out and then on the way back in. That's 80 naked men. On top of that, there are transfers from and to other prisons. 30 to 40 going out and 30 to 40 coming back in. There's another 60 to 80 naked men. And generally, there are only 2 or 3 people stripping. If you're not a regular that knows what's going on, then there's a very good chance they will use you to conduct the strip searches. I swear, I saw over 100 different penises today. And, yes, they really do come in all shapes and sizes. My day consisted of stripping, then breakfast, morning muster, then more stripping, a small break for a cup of tea, then more stripping. Lunchtime muster, which someone got wrong, a recount, followed by more stripping. Small gaps in between buses arriving, filled with more stripping. Afternoon muster, which was all correct, followed by, you guessed it, stripping. I began conducting strip searches 5 minutes after starting my shift, and did my last strip search as the guys were walking out telling me to get my bag. I do not care if I never see another naked man again. And the first thing I did when I got home was to give my wife a massive, long embrace and then took a long shower to cleanse myself of the memories. It didn't work. Today was definitely not a good day. Monday, June 11th. Today I worked in Tambo West. Normally, I'm not too fussed with the people I work with, but unfortunately, sometimes the direction of your day can very much be decided for you by the officers you work with. While most will make the day run smoothly, add fun and interesting conversation, there are a few that will ensure you need to carry a fire extinguisher in your back pocket for all the little spot fires they leave in their wake. Tony Malone is the latter. If common sense was sunshine, then this guy lives on the dark side of the moon. I've been to more code alphas because of this bloke than the next two officers combined. And today was no different. The morning began quite calm. 3 officers sitting in the station, talking shit about weekend football and stuff. Myself, Tony, and Bob. Bob had been at the prison for going on 6 years, so knew the processes. The morning rush had passed, meds had been and gone, and the methadones had been to receive their doses. Our next stop would be lunchtime muster, a couple of cell searches, followed by the regular afternoon duties. I stood to begin the intercom checks for the day when Tony interjected, "I'll do it," he said. I wasn't too fussed. It saved me from having to go cell to cell pressing buttons and stuff. "All yours, mate, thanks," was my reply. He almost made it out of the officer station when he turned and took out a large black garbage bag. Inside, I deflated. Bob and I exchanged a look that needed no words. Bob was running the book, so he would be acknowledging the intercoms as they came through and marking off each cell as they completed it. It was Tony's job to go from cell to cell and press each button. Whilst in each cell, it is also a requirement to check that the security and integrity of it is perfect. No cracked windows, no holes in the walls, flushing toilet, things like that. You generally spend about 2 minutes per room. Any contraband you find is confiscated, and any serious contraband, such as drugs, is reported, and confiscated, of course. What Tony was about to do was stir the pot. None of the 3 officers today were regular staff in this unit, so prisoners will try and use that to their advantage and try and get one over us. Sugar rations, coffee rations, single-cell allocation, stuff like that. But we will not change their world in a day, so what ends up happening with the wrong attitude? You create shit. And we could see it unfolding before us. Tony entered the first cell, and a few seconds later, the console buzzed. Bob answered it, and we waited for Tony to exit. 3 minutes, 4 minutes, nothing. I looked over to the cell and saw the prisoner standing just outside the cell looking in, arms folded, angry expression. He looks at me and indicates to his cell. My expression is one of, well, he is doing what he needs to do. Then Tony exited the cell, bag swinging, and made his way to the second cell. The first crook went into his cell, and the swearing that instantly flowed from his door told the story. A couple of other crooks now stand in the middle of the unit, looking in through the door. The bag looks a bit fatter when he exits the second cell, and by the time he exits the fourth, makes his way back to the officer station to change bags. He places the first under the desk, and with a couple of fresh ones, heads for the fifth cell. The murmurs I hear from the peanut gallery are not positive. Most notable, the comment stating, "Methinks someone's looking for a hot watering today." I just hope they wait for me to stand clear. There's one thing that an officer told me on my first day, and it is something I've never forgotten. And it's quite simple. The prisoners decide if you go home at the end of your shift. When there are 70 prisoners and 3 unarmed officers, the numbers are greatly in their favor. A number of prisoners are now standing just outside the door of the cell Tony is in. It wasn't looking good. Bob and I were both on our feet, Bob with his hand on the radio. Just then, the unit soup walks in and senses the situation. "Everything okay, guys?" he asks. I'm just going to say that Tony is going cell to cell," Bob says, pointing at the door. The soup groans and makes his way over. He looks at the prisoners and they break away a little. As he pops his head in, I hear him say, "All good there, Tone?" I don't hear the response, but judging by what the soup says next, it's clear he isn't happy. "You're a blow-in today, mate," Probably not a good idea to wind these boys up any more than you have to. Tony comes out of the cell and a couple of prisoners begin clapping. What a hero! Super Screw, they yell. His face is the color of rich tomatoes as he returns to the station. He sits on a chair, shaking his head. Just doing my bloody job, he says. Yeah, but there's a way to do things, mate. Anyway, all good. I'll continue the intercoms. I head over to the last inspected cell and proceed to complete the checks. I find minor contraband, but nothing really major. I just hope the crooks will let the morning slide and we get through the rest of the day without incident. Lunchtime muster came and it went okay, apart from the mumbled remarks directed at Tony. I could tell they weren't letting go, and judging by Tony's mood, neither was he. Count was called correct and the prisoners had lunch. I brought up the cell searching page and we were automatically allocated 2 random cells to search. Bob and I said we would conduct them and Tony would man the station. We made our way to the first cell and called the prisoner over. Anything in your cell that shouldn't be in there? Bob started. The prisoner shook his head. Okay, jump in and we'll do a quick strip search first then. The 3 of us entered the cell and conducted the strip. It was all clear and the crook left the cell. I closed the door behind him and began searching. It's not like in the movies where everything is tossed in the middle of the cell. You show a little respect and put things back. You still perform a thorough search, but without the theatrics. We didn't find anything and proceed to the second cell and repeat the process. Once the prisoner leaves, I again close the door and we began searching. Bob speaks as he begins rifling through the crook's belongings. You know, I was in here with him yesterday. No, I didn't. How did that go? I ask. He's just so fucking abrasive with him, and there's no reason for it. A crook asked him to see if it would be all right to wash his clothes for court as it's in a couple of days, and he said they only do it on the weekend. The crook says, but I've got court in 2 days. Can't you just ask? I kinda need it. You know what he says to him? Tell me, I say. He says, how is that my problem? The kid was polite, not rude, and he says that to him. You know, one day he's gonna... And that's when we hear the thud, followed by a bellow of cheering. I jump at the door and see crooks lined up on the top tier. I look at the officer's station and see Tony frozen in his seat. A shit bomb has hit him on the right shoulder, bounced into his head, and disintegrated into the wall of the station. Shit is dripping off the walls, and there's a big splatter on the side of his head. I grab my radio and call it code Alpha. Control responds. Back to your cells, I yell, and then repeat it louder to get them moving. Tony gets up and walks to the toilet immediately behind the station. Crooks begin to walk to their cells, clapping and cheering, happy with their achievement. I begin to lock the unit down as staff begin storming into the unit. The prisoners begin to move a bit quicker, not wanting to get caught up in the real shitstorm about to start. The soup enters and, once enough staff are in the unit, calls control to stand the code down. He knocks on the toilet door and Tony opens it. He's topless and wiping the side of his head with paper. I continue to lock cells, aided by several other staff members. We find out later that the bomber was a new crook named Delaney. He's on remand and has only been in the unit for 2 days. There's a very good chance that he was coaxed into it by a couple of the heavies in the unit. He was in for unpaid parking fines. Now, he can add an assault charge to his list. Stupid move. He's immediately taken to Murray North and placed in solitary confinement. The police will be called and he'll be charged. Tony is taken to the medical unit and assessed and subsequently sent home. He'll be undergoing a number of screening tests over the next few months to ensure he is disease-free. But in the meantime, he can't even kiss his wife. I hope he's okay and it all checks out clear. We end up with a replacement officer for the rest of the afternoon, and it runs smoothly without incidents. I go home that night reminding myself that they decide if you go home. We work in a place where trouble is around every corner. Why go searching for it as well? Attitude is everything. Tuesday, June 12th. Today I worked in the medical unit with another officer called Pam. She's been in the prison for a number of years and is assigned to this unit. It is a very quiet place to work compared to some of the other units. The medical area has two sections separated by a long corridor. One side is filled with prisoners coming and going, both protection and mainstream, all kept separated by thin perspex and walls. It is loud, busy, and unpleasant. At the other end of the corridor is the hospital wing. It is the complete opposite, filled mostly with elderly prisoners well above 55 who just sit around chatting during their runout. Each prisoner is allocated a runout time, usually in conjunction with other prisoners of their classification, being mainstream or protection. There's a chook pen for them to walk around and grab sun rays, as well as a main sitting area with a television. For the most part, it's outside on a nice day and inside in front of the TV on a shitty one. There are also several cells dedicated to prisoners that are on watch, as in suicide watch. They are assigned different categories based on their level of seriousness. Having a prisoner on watch means they are limited to what possessions they can have in their cell, what they get their meals served on, and even what they wear, the most serious of which having access to nothing more than a canvas gown. They're required to be visited at intervals of 15, 30, and 60 minutes. All of these observation cells have cameras in them, so they can also be monitored. On this beautiful Tuesday, we only had one prisoner on watch, and he was being calm and reasonable. We checked him every 60 minutes, and he was due to be taken off watch later in the day. I don't mind working in this unit and often accept overtime shifts in here. The staff that work in here are also quite pleasant and knowledgeable, making the shift enjoyable. No real war stories came out of today. One prisoner was a little disgruntled about not receiving the right dose of medication, but he was compliant with everything asked of him. Some days are just smooth sailing. Today was one of those days. Friday, June 15th. Today I started a run of 3 night shifts. Officers are either allocated a unit to man for the entire shift or a couple of units to search and manage for the night. If prisoners need after-hours attention, then officers responsible for that unit would be called to assist. I'm assigned to Galburn East, which is a step-down management unit. It is manned 24 hours a day, with prisoners generally locked down 23 hours a day. I've worked in here before, and don't mind being in a nice, warm unit on a cold night. I'm asked by a couple of other officers if I want to swap with them, but my Cheshire grin answers their question. Being assigned a unit is almost a gift on cold nights. I head straight to the unit to ensure enough time for a proper handover from day staff. I could have difficult prisoners or prisoners on watch, so I want to ensure I get the full rundown. I'm greeted by the 3 day officers, Luke, Darcy, and Rob. Rob being a good friend of mine who was on my training course when we first started in the prison. We shake hands, and he pointed to a cell on the top tier. "Enjoy that one tonight, brother," he snorts with a hearty laugh. The other 2 also chuckle, and I check the name on the muster. Cooper Shelley. My heart sank, right down to my toes. I looked at Rob and pretended to swing the muster board at him. "Seriously? Why the fuck is he back here?" I asked. "Been back a few days, and yes, he hasn't changed," Darcy replied, her smile still teasing me. What can I say about Cooper Shelley? Serial pest, serial masturbator, serial everything. He begins tugging his dick from the moment he wakes up to the moment he falls asleep. I'm surprised he hasn't ripped the thing off. Rob and Luke grab the muster board and begin their final count, opening every trap, including Cooper's. Judging by the chuckle from the officers, he is still beating ferociously. They finish their count and wait for correct to be called. We catch up on some brief gossip. Tony returned to work today and has been placed on light duties in reception. That basically meant he was on a no prisoner contact roster for the time being. Count is called correct shortly after, and the three of them head out of the unit. One last chuckle as they exit. Within seconds, the console beeps. Manned units have a console that accepts calls from the cell intercoms throughout the night. Instead of bugging control room staff like unmanned units, they get to annoy staff allocated to their unit all night long. Sometimes it can get pretty painful. I look at the console and see cell 44 flashing on the display. It's Cooper's. I push the answer button and begin my night shift. Yes, Cooper. There's no answer, but I can hear heavy breathing. Yes, Cooper, I repeat, louder. He still doesn't respond, and I can hear a shower running. Good times in cell 44. I cancel the call and begin checking my emails. When I finish scanning all 242 new emails, I put my dinner in the microwave. From the staff room, I hear the buzzer again. It's cell 48 this time. Luke Jones. Yes, Luke. Boss, I didn't get my meds. I check the movement book and see that Jones had been out at court for the day and only returned a half hour before lockup. He would have been out of the prison at the afternoon medication time. No worries, Luke. Leave it with me. I'll see what I can do. Thanks, boss. I cancel the call and return to the microwave. I'm halfway there when the intercom buzzes again. I do an about turn and look at the console. Cell 44. Yes, Cooper. No answer. Yes, Cooper. Louder. Still no answer. I cancel the call again and retrieve my dinner. I take it back to the station and phone the night supervisor, Claire Davies. Claire is a lovely lady with some 15 years' experience in the prison. She has a lot of respect from the staff for her hands-on approach and always backs officers when needed. I inform her of the meds for Luke, and she says she will organize some night staff to escort him to the medical wing, and I hear the call over the radio a couple of minutes later. I buzz Luke and ask him to be ready. 5 minutes later, 2 staff enter the unit, cuff Luke through the trap, and take him for his medication. I turn on the TV and begin to eat my dinner. The buzzer goes off yet again, and I groan again as I press the button to answer cell 44. How can I help you, Cooper? I say. Boss? He says quietly from the shower. Yes. I may need a mop, he replies. You know I can't give you a mop right now. You'll have to wait till the morning, I inform him. Okay then. I go back to eating my dinner, and 10 minutes later, the officers return with Luke. They put him away, and I return him in the movement book. We have a quick chat, tell a joke, and they go back to their duties. I quietly sit back and watch TV. Some reality show about people looking for a rental property, followed by a show about people looking for a home in another country. It's weird what you get into sometimes. Who would have thought that a show about searching for a home could be so enthralling? I'm just about to find out if they choose House 1 or House 3 when I hear a trickling off to my right. I peer over in that direction and see a thin stream of water leaking from the top tier onto the carpet below. The cell where the water leak appears to be coming from? Cell 44. Cooper. Fuck, I say to myself. I buzz him on the intercom. Cooper, what are you doing, man? I hear him chuckle a little. I may need a mop, boss, he answers. Turn the water off, mate. No reply. Cooper, turn the water off. Now one of the crooks opposite the unit sees the water and alerts the rest of the unit. He laughs loudly, then yells, Boys, Cooper's flooding up. Welcome back, Coop. Others join in, egging him on. I quickly grab a big garbage bin and put it under the water stream. It will fill quite quickly, and I'll need to do something fast if I want to prevent a flood. I phone the night soup, but get no answer. I call her on my radio, asking for her phone location. She calls me a couple of minutes later. "What's up, Kingy?" "Cooper is flooding his cell, ma'am. It's running off the top tier," I inform her. "He was doing it last night as well. He normally stops after a few minutes. Grab the laundry tub and put that under the stream. That should catch most of it." I acknowledge her reply and hang up the phone. I find the laundry tub and exchange it with the bin, which is already half full. I return to the station and let things be. Just as she predicted, the water decreased in volume after about 10 minutes. Then, 20 minutes later, it stopped completely. I return to my TV and am able to watch a few hours of uninterrupted reality TV. At around 5 a.m., I buzz 2 prisoners that have court. I inform them that staff will be picking them up shortly to take them to admissions. One acknowledges me and begins to get ready. The second one refuses. "I don't have court today, boss." "You're on the list, Brody. I hear you, but when you're on the list, they have to get you ready." "I'm not going, boss. I don't care," he snarled back at me, clearly wanting to return to his nap. "I'm just telling you, mate. If you refuse, then I will have to get you a firm escort. You don't want that, do you?" "Whatever." Not good. I phone the night soup and inform her of the situation. She says she'll just organize the tactical boys to come along and assist. They have an uncanny ability to convince prisoners to comply. And sure enough, when they drop the trap and speak to Brody, he happily obliges and makes his way out of the unit, even giving me a good morning salute on his way past the station. The worst part, though, is when he returns to the unit an hour later because he was canceled off the bus. His smirk when he returns tells me exactly what's on his mind. What the fuck do you know, screw? 30 minutes later, I'm exiting the prison and heading to my car. It was an okay night, but I knew I had 2 to go. And tonight, I would be back in Goulburn East to do it all again. Saturday, June 16th. I return for my second night shift. I can't say I'm looking forward to it, but I'm also a little curious as to what the night will bring. It is how war stories are born, after all. The same staff are in the unit when I arrive, and they tell me that it has been a pretty cruisy sort of day. A couple of small codes throughout the prison, but that's about all. I point up to Cooper's cell, and they both shake their heads. "He's been pretty quiet," Rob says, without any sign of sarcasm. They begin their final muster of the day whilst I put my supplies in the fridge. Spaghetti bolognese with chorizo. I made it myself. 10 minutes later, control calls count correct, and I'm left alone in the unit once more. I begin my night by checking my emails and get through those relatively quickly. Next, I set the TV up and check out the guide for anything worthwhile. From the look of things, I'll be able to catch up on some more renters hunting for a home as I settle in for a quiet night. At around 9:30 p.m., the console buzzes. It's cell 33, a prisoner named Mark Russell. He is in prison for producing child pornography and fairly new in the unit. I know that he's been getting burnt quite a bit from the other prisoners. "Yes, Mark?" "Boss, I'm having chest pains," he says. "Okay, Mark, but I'm not a doctor. I'll have to call a code." "Thank you, boss," he said, as I grab my radio and call a code Mike. The control room announces it to all radios, and I go to the trap and look inside. He's sitting on the bed watching TV. When he sees me, he begins rubbing his chest and groaning. I leave the trap open and wait for the soup and staff. It is a quite common ploy to fake chest pains when wanting to bail from a unit. The prisoner may have debts or is being stood over for medication or possessions, or might simply be the receiver of a lot of abuse from other prisoners. Unfortunately, you cannot prejudge and must make the call to have them checked out. The ramifications for not calling a code are astronomical. In any case, calling a code and writing a 2-minute report is not the end of the world when you have 12 long hours of nothing anyway. A couple of minutes later, staff begins to arrive. The night soup, Claire, enters and I fill her in. She listens, then heads over to the cell and cracks the door. They talk for a couple of minutes, then when the medical team arrive, she asks them in. They enter the cell and begin their assessment. Suddenly, there is yelling from the cell across the unit. "Look who's trying to bail, lads!" I hear movement in several other cells, and half a dozen prisoners begin barking and howling. "Don't leave us, dog! Stay and play with us, you fucking fiddler!" someone else yells out. Pretty soon, it's like the whole unit is joining in. One of the other officers just smiles at me. The sound is so loud, I don't hear what she says when she does speak. She shakes her head and gives up. The medical team asks for a stretcher, and within a couple of minutes, Mark is being wheeled out of the unit to the chorus of howls and abuse. Once they leave, it doesn't take long for the unit to go quiet again. I resume my position in front of the TV again after writing Mark out in the book. Not 2 minutes later, I hear a familiar noise. I look across, and it would seem the commotion had awoken Cooper. There's a stream of water leaking onto the carpet. I quickly wheel the laundry tub under the waterfall and hope he doesn't take too long to quit. I call the soup just to give her a heads up in case it goes pear-shaped, and her advice is the same as the previous night. I watch a bit more TV, monitoring the trickle of water, and after about 15 minutes, see it subsiding. I check the tub and see it's less than half full. I breathe a sigh of relief and leave the tub where it is in case he fires up again. The phone rings a couple of hours later, and I check the time to see that it's already a little after midnight. I answer, and it's the duty soup. "Kingy, Russell is coming back to you. He's been checked and given the all clear. He may buzz you up again, as I'm guessing he wants to go to one of the management units. He's not getting moved." "Thanks, Claire." I go to the cell and crack the door, ready for his return. 10 minutes later, he's led in, cuffed, and not looking happy. They place him in his cell and I lock the door. He reaches through and the cuffs are removed. He doesn't speak as I close the trap and then thank the officers. A minute later, I'm alone again. The rest of the night is quiet, and there's virtually no activity. Apart from the occasional cough and fart, the unit remains silent. No one buzzes, and the phone stays quiet. That's the perfect ending to an okay night. And as I drive home, I remind myself that there is one to go. Fingers crossed. Sunday, June 17th. It's my last night shift for a while, and I'm keen to get it over and done with. The eyeballs tend to struggle a bit after 3 nights, and I really want to get back to normal. I enter the prison and see a couple of familiar faces heading down the path towards me. Sam is on his way out and gives me a fist bump as we pass. "Have a good night, bro. Cooper has been a pain in the arse today. Hope he doesn't give you too much stick." "Wonderful. Last night anyway. Fingers crossed. Have a good one, mate." We part ways and I head for the unit. I can hear the burning as I enter the compound, some 40 or so meters from the unit door. I groan, my heart sinking slightly. As I enter through the airlock, my ears begin ringing from the yelling. It would seem Mark Russell is copping a pasting. The staff are standing in the office, trying to stay out of the noise. I join them, and they just laugh. When they finally get themselves under control, one of them says, "Yep, you're in for a treat, champ. Cooper is practically ripping his knob off. Russell is copping a burning of epic proportions, and you have 2 on watch, both S1s. 2 S1s? I sigh. That means a written observation log every 15 minutes for 2 prisoners. I would have a busy night. But on the bright side, I won't fall asleep. The unit doesn't let up as the 2 officers begin their final muster. Russell is quiet in his cell, and either very good at ignoring the uproar aimed at him, or passed out. I buzz him to make sure he's okay, and he says he is. As long as he is alive on my watch, that's all that matters. Control calls count incorrect a few minutes later, and the officers repeat their muster. They go trap to trap and reconfirm their numbers. They call in the same number and await count correct, which is called about 5 minutes later. The unit is quietened considerably by the time I'm left alone. The occasional howl and insult are thrown towards Russell, but not as bad as before. I start by checking my emails again. No love from anyone, so I turn the computer off and warm my dinner. The microwave buzzes as the unit erupts again. I wonder whether there isn't anything good on TV that would occupy these guys' attention for a couple of hours. But after another 10 minutes, they settle down once again. By 9 o'clock, I've eaten my dinner, completed the latest round of checks, and I'm settling in for some TV when, again, that familiar trickle starts. Fucking idiot, I mutter under my breath. I wheel the tub under the water flow and sit back in the station. Less than 5 minutes later, I notice that instead of diminishing, the waterfall is increasing, actually beginning to full-on rage. I phone the soup as the tub begins to overflow. He is flooding up, ma'am, and the tub is already overflowing. Is there a bin or something? I'm sure he'll stop again soon. Okay, I'll have a look. I'll keep you posted, Claire. I hang up and locate a bin, which I exchange with the tub. The water is now a small window pane wide as it's rushing off the top tier. The bin is half full within a matter of minutes, and I call the soup again. Meanwhile, the unit has once again jumped on board and are egging Cooper on. Cheers and howls of laughter echo around the unit as I try and get Cooper to talk to me over the intercom. He doesn't answer, and after a couple of minutes, I cancel the call. I am powerless to stop the water and have run out of containers. When the soup and a couple of night officers do show, the carpet is under a couple of inches of water. I've got the key for the utilities door. Should be able to switch the water off, Claire yells, trying to raise her voice over the cheering. I nod and follow her up the stairs. The entire top tier is flooded, and you can see the water bubbling out from under the door of cell 44. We reach the utility door and open it. There are a number of switches, but no water valve. We check the door on the other side, but no luck. Next, we try the door at the end of the tier, but still no cigar. Claire calls for the maintenance crew to be contacted, and we wait for their response. The phone eventually rings, and she heads downstairs to answer it. When she returns, she points at the ceiling. It's up in there. She makes her way to the far corner, stairs leading up into the attic. One officer remains at the cell door whilst we go and search for the valve. After several minutes, we finally locate what appears to be the cutoff valve. We turn it off and call out to the officer at the cell for confirmation. They call back to say the water has been shut off. Fuck him. We'll leave it off till the morning. Can sort it out then. I agree and head downstairs. The floor will also be fixed in the morning. I check in on Cooper and see him standing in a now waterless shower, madly masturbating. I close the trap and shake my head. As I reach the officer's station, the intercom buzzes. It's Cooper. Claire looks at me as I answer the call. Yes, Cooper, I ask. I think I need a mop, boss, he says. Several prisoners laugh at this and begin to cheer again. Claire shakes her head as she heads out of the unit. I'm left alone again, and after 15 minutes or so, the rest of the unit goes quiet. I do my welfare checks and write them in the book. A couple of hours pass before the intercom goes again. It's cell 33. Yes, Mark, I say. Boss, I have chest pains. I groan. Mark, same as last night, mate. I have to call a code. Sit tight. I grab my radio and make the call. The staff, some looking like they just woke from a 14-hour power nap, slowly roll into the unit a short time later, followed by Claire. She points at cell 44, and I point at cell 33. She nods and goes to the trap, opening it and peering inside. There's a sudden gush of water followed by a painful scream. Claire pushes herself away from the door and drops to the ground. The unit erupts with howls and screams of laughter as Claire clutches her face. The bastard hot-watered her. One officer lunges at the trap and slams it shut as I grab my radio and call a code Alpha, adding "staff down," which is sure to hurry the medical staff up. They come running in a few seconds later, wheeling their trolley, the unit still vocal and enjoying the show. They rush to Claire and try to calm her. Another officer managed to get a cloth with cold water and hand it to her. She grabs it and holds it on her face. We find out later that the glasses Claire wears saved her eyes from the initial contact. They may have even saved her eyes completely. The stretcher arrives a minute or two later, and we all help Claire onto it. She is groaning in pain, and what I can see of her face, it's quite raw. The second and third soups run into the unit and see her. "Who did it?" one asks. "Mark Russell," I say, pointing at the cell. "Cunt. Absolute cunt. Just because we wouldn't move him," he barks, the veins in his forehead bulging. "Well, he's moving now, isn't he?" the other soup pipes in. "Standard rule is that once you assault an officer, you are transferred out of the prison immediately. I wouldn't be surprised if the bus was already on the way." "Leave the fucker in the cell and wait," the first soup says. His name is Matthew, and has been a soup for a number of years. The other soup, Norman, only made supervisor last month. They both now occupy the officer station, one on the phone, the other on the computer, organizing a bus trip out of here for Russell. The special state extraction team arrive an hour later and quietly speak with both supervisors. Claire had already been taken to the hospital by ambulance, so hopefully was receiving the treatment she needed to lessen the pain. "Let's grab him, boys," the senior extraction officer said to his lads. Norman followed them to the cell and opened the trap. "What's happened?" the senior asked. I don't hear the response, but hear the senior continue. "Well, I don't think that would be my first choice of action. Anyway, we're here to take you to another location. Come and put your hands through the trap so we can cuff you." There's a loud reply from within the cell, but no hands. "I suggest you put your hands through, Mark. Otherwise, you will not like your second choice." Still no hands. "I'm not playing with you, Mark." He steps away from the door and turns to an offsider. "Okay, let him have it." The second officer takes out a can of capsicum spray, looks through the trap, then releases a 5-second squirt. He closes the trap and stands back. There's a whimper, a screech, then a howl of pain from within the cell. Maybe 2 minutes pass before there's a very persistent tap on the door. Somewhere behind me, on the lower tier, a crook begins to chuckle. "Guess he got the message," the senior says to no one in particular. He opens the trap, standing to one side to avoid the spray leak, and 2 shaking hands appear through the trap, accompanied by loud, uncomfortable groans. Mark is cuffed, and an asp baton is fed through the cuffs to prevent him from pulling his hands back inside. The cell door is cracked, and Mark is grabbed by 3 officers who pull him to one side. The baton is removed, Mark is placed against a wall, and the cell door is resealed to prevent capsicum spray leaking into the unit, all within the space of a couple of seconds, like poetry in motion. "Thank you, gents," the senior shouts out as they exit the unit. Within a few minutes, I'm alone once more. I type my report and email it to the duty supervisor. The rest of the night is quiet and the crooks are silent. I end my shift as the day staff enter the unit, and I give them a full rundown of the night. They're shocked and saddened to hear about Claire and commit to making a call to the hospital later to see how she is. 20 minutes later, I'm driving home through morning peak hour, listening to some classic 80s tracks. Last night was not a good night. Wednesday, June 20th. called in for overtime today. I enter the prison for a new day and immediately ask about Claire from a staff member at reception. They tell me she was released from hospital Monday afternoon and is in very good spirits. She'll be returning in a couple of weeks. Great news to hear there's no permanent injury. I head to my unit for the day, Glen Elg East, which is a medium-sized protection unit housing some 54 prisoners in 38 cells. It's a mix of single and dual occupancy cells. It also has a very high percentage of prisoners over the age of 55, giving it its nickname of the Retirement Village. It's generally a pretty easy day in Glen Elg East, as the prisoners aren't as volatile as some of the younger ones, and they still know the meaning of words like respect and manners. As long as you keep your own opinions to yourself and don't try and judge them verbally, you generally have a lovely day. I do want to point something out here, and it's not my personal opinion, which I try for the best part to keep out of my writing. Prison officers are not there to judge. They're not there to punish either. The prison system as a whole is designed as a rehabilitation system, meaning the locking up of a prisoner is their punishment. The punishment isn't things that happen in the prison. The punishment is the removal of their right to freedom and the removal of certain privileges. They aren't handed big sledgehammers and a pile of rocks. For the most part, they're given a room with a shower and hot water, a toilet, a bed, some bedding, and a TV. They have a communal table tennis setup, a gym, a treadmill, an exercise bike, boxing equipment, pool table, and a big screen TV. That is their punishment. I enter Glen Elg East and find my other two off-siders already in the unit, Sam Howell and Thelma Wallace. Sam you know for my June 1st shift. Thelma is as old as the hills and just as aggressive. She's like a pit bull and doesn't put up with shit. She is known as Repo Lady amongst the prisoners, and maybe a few officers as well, for her endless confiscations of televisions. She is not afraid to go toe-to-toe with prisoners with her 5'1" stature, and even though she may need to look up to most, she yells that little bit louder to make sure they can hear her words. She's currently standing in the officer's station, reading the muster sheet, and when I enter the station, her smile widens when she sees me. "Simon, hey! Long time no see." "Hi, Thelma. Good to see you, love." I give her a brief hug and reach out to Sam for a handshake. Our shipping officer arrives, and he completes our team of 4. It's Sashi, one of the most well-known officers in the jail. He has a tenacity for crude and totally inappropriate jokes at inappropriate times, but he knows how to put a smile on your face. After a couple of minutes of general chit-chat, Thelma and Sam head out to complete morning muster, Thelma carrying the muster board and Sam the ligature knife. I open my email and check the daily movement sheet, taking note of the moves to and from the unit. It looks like we have 1 prisoner leaving to another prison and 2 new prisoners arriving from another unit. I check the unit muster and allocate the 2 new prisoners their new rooms, both into dual cells. Suddenly, there's a call over the radio. "Code Mike, Glen Elg East." I look over and it's Thelma calling the response. Her and Sam are on the top tier at the other end of the unit. I hurry up the stairs and over to where they're standing, the trap lowered on the cell door. As I reach them, staff are already entering the unit. A supervisor, Jason Rigby, with 3 other officers. As the supervisor nears us, Thelma relays the issue. "He isn't responding, sir." The supe peers in and tries to wake the prisoner up. I don't hear a response from where I'm standing, and when the supe cracks the cell door, I gather there was none. The supe, Thelma, and 1 other officer enter the cell, and I hear the supe yelling, "Stanley! Stanley!" I see the supe feel for a pulse. Something bumps into my elbow, and it's the medical team. We make room for them, and they enter the cell and begin feeling for a pulse. They beckon to 2 officers, who lift the prisoner off the bed and bring him out onto the tier. They remove his shirt, and one of them begins CPR. The other is on the radio calling for an ambulance to be summoned immediately. She then grabs a respiratory mask and begins giving breaths. After about a minute, one of the nurses reaches for a portable defibrillator and begins hooking up the wires. A few seconds later, she shouts, "Clear!" and I see the prisoner briefly jerk. She checks the instrument, then feels for a pulse. She nods and says something to the soup. He turns and calls someone on the mobile. I see him nod to the nurse as she yells "Clear" a second time. "Come on, Stanley, mate," I hear a prisoner yell from a few cells down. Another one echoes the first one from the other end of the unit. The nurses continue working on the prisoner for about 5 minutes before a second team of medical staff arrive. Their trolley looks to be a bit more technical than the first, and they immediately replace the wires with their own. When one shouts "Clear" a few seconds later and the prisoner jerks, I actually see one of the nurses sigh with relief. It appears they have restarted his heart. They begin to wheel him out and take him to the medical unit. Unfortunately, ambulances take time to admit into a prison, and it's another 10 minutes or so before Stanley is taken on board. Once the staff have left, we continue with our morning muster, and then begin to write our reports while waiting for count to be called correct. When it is finally called, nearly 2 hours late, a couple of crooks cheer. I unlock the top tier, while Thelma unlocks the bottom. The crooks immediately exit their cells and head for the officer station. A couple approach me and a couple, Thelma. All are asking about Stanley, concerned about their prison brother. The other 2 officers give exactly the same answer that I do. There is no current information, and they know as much as we did. If I find out something throughout the day, then I would let them know. Most of the time you wouldn't hear the end of it with crooks hovering, eavesdropping, and repeatedly asking for answers. Glen Elg East just had a different type of crook, the kind that still had respect, and so they let it be. The morning, or what was left of it, ran very smooth. Thelma and I went to Stanley's cell and packed his belongings into bags, which Sashi would take to the property department to be organized, and if he didn't return, would be picked up by his family. Sashi escorted our exiting prisoner to the admissions building and a half hour later returned with our incoming ones, both of which are older prisoners. One is 58, Roger Norman, who has been in the system for 3 weeks for his first offense. The other is Brian Unsworth, 74, a serial killer who has been jailed since the late 80s. Brian will never see the outside world again and has become somewhat of a model prisoner. He often volunteers around the prison as a mentor to other protection prisoners, offering advice on how prisoners can deal with their sentence. Prisoners don't always cope with the length of prison terms and need guidance. Help can sometimes come from the most unlikely of people. Brian is one of those people that resigned himself to the fact that his life was over, on the outside at least, so he only had 2 choices. He once shared his first couple of weeks in prison with me when I worked in Yarra North for a couple of years. "Mr. King, I could have either topped myself or turned things the fuck around and make a go of it. I chose the latter. I've never been one to give up," he said, smiling, his eyes distant. And he has been in prison for 30 years, this year, 26 of which were spent in this very prison. As Brian approached the officer station and saw me, he tipped his head a little in a hello gesture. "Morning, Mr. King," he added. "Good morning, Brian. Your bedding is over there. Just sign here. Cell 42. Roger will be in 44. Morning, Roger." Roger doesn't make eye contact, but signs his name on the sheet of paper on the bench in front of him. Both are carrying a single duffel bag of their possessions. They go over and get their bedding, a couple of prisoners now making their way over to offer assistance. Both are welcomed into the unit as they head up to the top tier. They drop their belongings off, then return to the main area of the unit, Brian introducing Roger to the rest of the boys. Roger is looking mighty uncomfortable, but manages to shake a few hands. In this unit, There isn't a lot of judgment from other prisoners. They know who they are, where they are, and why they are here. Their offenses are very similar, and everyone just wants to do the time they're sentenced to. There are 4 lifers in the unit already, including a resident magician, James Cagney, a man convicted of killing his entire family. Brian made 5. The unit starts to get busy as more prisoners become aware of new arrivals. They slowly make their way to the growing crowd, and the greetings and laughter increase. 5 minutes later, control calls midday muster time, and the congregation return to their cells. Count is completed without a hitch, and once control calls it correct, Sashi takes a couple of prisoners for their medical appointments. When he returns half-hour later, he volunteers to help me with the daily random cell search. I check the computer, and the lucky winner is cell 20, Gordon Luck, aged 48, and in on a short 6-month stretch. We call Gordon over, give him the good news, and he leads us to his cell. Sashi enters the cell after Gordon, and I follow, closing the cell door behind me. Sashi beckons to Gordon to stand still and commences the strip search, talking in his deep Indian accent. "Okay, my friend, let's begin. Is there anything in this cell or on you that you shouldn't have?" Gordon shakes his head. Sashi motions to each article to come off and inspects it when handed to him. When the underwear comes off and he's inspecting it, he signals for Gordon to raise his arms and open his mouth. I fight hard to resist the laugh when Sashi next speaks. "Oh dear. My friend, God was not smiling the day he gave you that penis." I bit my lip, Gordon looking embarrassed but managed a small laugh. We finish the strip and Gordon exits the cell. "Seriously, dude?" I snap. "God didn't smile? That crook is an ex-Catholic priest. You want to get us reported?" He smiles and then beams his toothy grin at me. "Relax, man. He fiddled some boys. He knows all about little dicks. Fuck him," Sashi says. I don't share his sentiment or his professionalism, but the man was born for humor, whether inappropriate or not. The search is fruitless, and the cell is given the all-clear. The afternoon goes by quite quickly. There are a couple of code mics, but that's about all. One prisoner began air raiding in the middle of the unit about someone stealing his milk, but we dealt with it quickly before it caused a major event. Funnily enough, stealing, even in units filled with thieves, is frowned upon and can have dire consequences. Broken fingers, bashings, or even getting stabbed by a homemade shiv. Lockup count comes quickly, and we finish up our duties for the day. As we begin our lockup, James Cagney asks me if there is any news on Stanley. I say there isn't, but they should know something by the morning. He nods and heads for his cell. We lock the cells, make our final checks, and call in our count. 5 minutes later, it is called correct, and we head towards the exit. As I walk through reception on my way out of the prison, I find out that Stanley, the prisoner from that morning, had passed away this afternoon at the hospital. He was a convicted pedophile, sentenced to 8 years jail with 6 left to serve. It was his very first conviction in almost 80 years of life. He was 78. Thursday, June 21st. I'm rostered in Glen Elg East and am glad to see both Thelma and Sam on again today. Our 4th officer is Chris Upton, a lovely fellow with about 4 years under his belt. He is big, he is loud, and when he laughs, you can hear him 2 units away. I've always enjoyed working with Chris, and like Sashi, he loves a good joke. Still, some inappropriate, but some you would pay for. With the usual morning greetings complete, Thelma mentions Stanley. I acknowledge her, and we don't really spend more than a passing comment on the subject. As an officer, I don't really have feelings either way. I can't speak for everyone, but I don't get involved too much in the personal lives of prisoners. For me, it's a job, and so I try and stay out of things for exactly that reason, because I don't want to be emotionally involved. The other reason is that you open yourself to a lot of conflict of interest. To befriend a prisoner beyond the basic pleasantries mean you are open to coercion and pressure to bring in narcotics and contraband. Officers have lost their jobs in the past or even ended up in prison themselves for trafficking goods into the jail. Some officers have been offered substantial financial reward for doing so and probably realize too late that once you agree, they own you forever. Some say everyone has a price, and here, there is no amount of money that would convince me to bring in illegal goods. None. $100+ grand a year job with security and benefits is not worth risking for the sake of a quick buck. Not even a few thousand. And that's not even taking into consideration the moral issues. For me personally, when I have been propositioned, which I have, my answer has and always will be a very firm no. And I like to believe that the majority of officers that I work with feel the same. Time passes, and I check the emails and see there are no movements to or from the unit today apart from the usual medical, court, visits, and education moves. Even though Chris is the shipping officer today, I offer to help him out and do some moves for him. It's a beautiful sunny day, and I wouldn't mind getting out and about a bit. Thelma and I begin to conduct our unit count. Thelma marks the names off as I open each trap and call out the name. I'm greeted a good number of times and return the greetings cheerily. All cells check out fine, and we call in our count once we return to the station. 10 minutes later, count is called correct, and the day begins. I decide to escort the first prisoners of the day, while Chris helps with the morning medication. 2 have to go to the medical wing, 1 for the dentist and the other for a psych appointment. I call them to the officer station, check to make sure they have their IDs, and head out. As we approach the gate, I call the quadrangle to authorize our move through it. Glen Elg East, make your move. I unlock the gate and we head toward the medical wing. The usual course of abuse and insults come flying through the fence from the opposite fence line as if the mainstream boys have been lying in wait. The 2 prisoners I'm escorting show very little interest and make a beeline for their destination. As we leave one course of abuse behind, we enter another. The medical wing's holding cells are filled with prisoners, both protection and mainstream. I usher my prisoners into one of the cells and lock them in, the yells echoing through the corridors. I mouth the names to the officer sitting at the station, and she gives me a thumbs up. I return to the unit, as the crooks will take time to process. The officer in charge will contact the unit when they have finished, and one of us will go and retrieve them. In the meantime, there will be other moves to complete, as well as unit duties to perform. I re-enter the unit, and Thelma asks if I can help Chris do a couple of cell searches. I happily oblige, and we head to the first one, Cell 11. A long-termer called Russ Stanton occupies it. He's been in the unit for a couple of years and doesn't object to our search. I conduct a strip search, and nothing is found. Russ exits the cell, and Chris and I go to work, checking food containers, bedding, and under his bunk. We flush the toilet, check the kettle, radio, and TV. Chris checks the clothing, piece by piece, while I look through his books, magazines, and toiletries. It all seems to check out, until I pick up a tube of toothpaste. As I pick it up, I notice that it's a little too heavy. It's squishy, but when I try and bend it, I find that it won't. There's something concealed in it. I call out to Chris, and as he comes over, I undo the top of the tube. I squeeze the tube out and find a long, mini screwdriver hidden in the toothpaste. I put it aside, Chris giving me a thumbs up, and we continue our search. Although we were thorough, nothing else is found. I put the screwdriver in my pocket and we head to our next cell, number 36. This cell is occupied by our kitchen worker, Jesse Thompson. Jesse is a convicted drug user, dealer, and isn't afraid to lag on anyone if it means he doesn't have to face the music. He's in protection as he has accumulated so many drug debts that he's wanted in almost every unit within the prison. On top of that, he gave information on a couple of prisoners, hence his permanent residence in Glen Elg East. He's responsible for reheating meals when they arrive in the meal trolleys, then serving them out at the designated meal times. When we motion for him to join us in his cell, we see his demeanor change immediately. He becomes animated, shaking his head, and remains in the kitchen. We call him again, waving him over. Another prisoner, in the kitchen with him, says something to him, and Jesse begins walking toward us. "Just a quick cell search, Jesse," Chris says to him, and we follow him into the cell. Once inside, Chris is standing in front of me and continues, "Anything in here or on you that you shouldn't have, Jesse?" "No, boss," he says, low and abrupt. He strips and nothing is found. We let him leave once he is dressed and close the door behind him. "Clearly something in here," Chris says. "Think so, buddy. Wasn't happy, was he?" I reply, already scanning the cell. I begin at the front, including bathroom and clothing, while Chris takes the back of the cell, including bed, desk, and food items. I flush the toilet, then began searching the clothing, one item at a time. I search the socks individually, but find nothing. I search the toiletries, the toothpaste in particular, shampoo bottles, but again, nothing. Chris finishes searching his area and locates nothing. We look at each other. "There's something here, mate," I murmur as I scan the cell again. "I know, but where the fuck's he hiding it?" Chris asks, also looking around. I recheck the small shower curtain, squeezing it from top to bottom, but nothing. I then peel it off, tearing its Velcro attachment from the wall, where it connects to its anchor point. Nothing. Then I hear Chris almost cheer. "I'll be fucked. Look at this." He had been sorting through a cup of pens and pencils. He was bending over the desk with a pencil held out in front of him. It was the kind that had an eraser attached to the top of it. He had removed the eraser and its small metallic attachment to find the pencil had been almost completely hollowed out. Inside was a fine white powder. There were 4 other pencils of the same variety in the cup, and each one contained the same white powder. "Sneaky fucker," Chris exclaimed, almost jumping for joy. "Nice one, mate, nice one," I answered, clapping him on the back. We took all the pencils, scooped the powder into a small plastic bag we carry, and exit the cell. Jesse was eagle-eyed as we came out, and began pacing in and out of the kitchen when he saw Chris carrying something. As we neared the officer station, a prisoner began yelling from the kitchen area, his voice tense. "Jesse, don't be a fucking dickhead, man." Gasps and something crashing to the floor echoed around the unit. "Jesse!" another yelled. Then, "Oh, fuck!" Chris and I made our way towards the kitchen when Jesse came out holding his arm up, blood gushing in a fine arc across the floor from a deep slash to his wrist. He had slashed up and was still holding the blade. He slashed again, another slice opening his arm from wrist to elbow. Blood began pouring out and pooling on the floor beneath him. "That wasn't my shit, boss. They're gonna fucking kill me for losing their shit. May as well kill me now." I heard Thelma call a code alpha with a weapon as Chris and I approached Jesse, waving other crooks away. I could hear Sam and Thelma begin to lock the unit down, ushering prisoners into cells, any cells, and out of the way. In situations like this, the less prisoners that are roaming the unit, the better. Prisoners love to rubberneck. They're also known to get involved, so locking them away lessens the risk of a spark-up. They don't necessarily have to go into their own cell. Any cell will do. "Jesse, drop the blade, mate. You don't want to do this," Chris says to him, keeping his distance. I stand behind a chair, ready to raise it if he comes at me. There are very few things more dangerous in a prison then a prisoner with a blade. The area is clear of other crooks when the TOs arrive, bursting through the door. One comes up behind me and taps me on the shoulder. "Step back, Simon," he whispers to me. I back off, Chris following, never turning our back. 4 TOs now begin to negotiate with Jesse, blood still freely flowing, covering the floor. His white t-shirt looks like a horror movie, completely drenched. 2 of the TOs have their spray out and are holding it in front of them. The other 2, their batons drawn. They won't negotiate for long. And it turns out they don't need to. Half a minute or so later, Jesse's arm drops. His legs begin to unbuckle, and he hits the floor, unconscious. He has either lost consciousness from blood loss or from exhaustion. But either way, it's made the situation a lot easier. The officers slowly approach, spray still at the ready, when one kicks the blade away. Another drops and holds one arm, while another grabs the other. They handcuff him and motion for the medical team to approach. They approach with their trolley and begin working on him. Turns out he lost a lot of blood, which caused him to lose consciousness. The cuts were quite deep, a couple severing arteries in his arm and wrist. He is eventually stretchered to the hospital wing, then subsequently by ambulance to hospital, although is returned later in the day, his arm stitched and heavily bandaged. We speak to the duty soup and show him our find. He nods his head in appreciation and asks us to complete our reports as soon as possible. He also asks us to leave the unit locked down for the time being, although to return crooks to their own cells one at a time. A couple of minutes later, our normal complement of 4 officers are left alone in the unit. Chris and I begin our reports, and a half hour later, I assist Sam and Thelma return crooks to their own cells. I'm happy with our find. Crooks don't always know what the substance is when they consume it, and it can seriously compromise the safety of officers and other prisoners. A drug-affected prisoner can be extremely dangerous, and as experience has proven in the past, they can cause serious damage and injuries. Once the prisoners are all returned to their cells, Chris and I return to Jesse's cell and begin itemizing and bagging his belongings, as is standard procedure. It prevents theft and also frees up his cell, which he won't be returning to for a while. He'll be taken to a management unit, where he will be on suicide watch as well as in protection until it is ascertained whether he is in danger or not, based on his claims. Sam is called to the medical wing for the 2 prisoners that I escorted down earlier, whom he escorts back to the unit. Lunchtime muster comes and goes, and the unit remains in lockdown. Our floor cleaner is let out and begins cleaning up the blood, while Thelma helps the nurse go trap to trap with lunchtime medications. The prisoners have special training on cleaning blood spills, and it gives them an extra kick in their weekly pay. It takes him around an hour to finish cleaning up, and once done, we contact the soup to get an update. He asks us to leave the unit in lockdown for the rest of the day. We happily oblige, making our afternoon a little easier. There's a code Mike called in the middle of the afternoon, but that's about all. We escort the nurse around for afternoon medications, then let the second kitchen billet out for evening meal prep. He asks if his cellie can help, and we agree. The meals are handed through the trap, and once finished, the billets return to their own cells. It's not long until evening muster, and once count is called correct, it's home time. Just like that, our shift has come to an end. Monday, June 25th. I return to Glen Elg East again and find Thelma in the unit already. She beckons to me as I enter the unit, putting her hand to my ear. "The unit soup wants you to call him. And good morning, love," she says. "Morning, love. Jason?" I ask. She nods. I phone him, and rather than having a conversation, he tells me he will see me shortly. Curious, I hang up the phone. "He is on his way," I say to Thelma, just as Con Geopolis nears the officer station. Con is our third and has been in the prison for about 10 years. He is one of those Greek men that love being Greek. He's in his early 40s and has a giant belly with a laugh to match. He's one of those officers that everyone knows and everyone talks about with a smile. Just a really likable guy. I haven't seen Con in a while and enthusiastically shake hands with him. "Good to see you, my friend," I say, still shaking his hand. "How have you been?" "Very good, buddy, very good. Been back to Greece for a month. Now I'm back to this shithole," he replies, giving Thelma a hug. He puts his bag down and turns his head, seeing the fourth officer coming in. It's Barb Toohey, a tall lady of 30 with about a year in the prison. She doesn't look too happy, and as she nears us, shakes her head. "Was supposed to be working in visits, but they shifted me here, bastards." "Never mind, love," Thelma responds. "You'll play with us today. We'll look after you." Barb smiles, sees Con, and gives him a peck on the cheek. "Welcome back, stranger. How was it?" she asks. "Amazing. Such a beautiful time. Sue and the kids loved it," he says, smiling. Barb gives me a brief hug, then heads to the office with her bag. Jason, the soup, enters a short time later, waves at everyone, then beckons me to the office. "Shut the door, Simon," he says as he sits behind the desk. "Would you mind working in here permanently for a while?" he asks. "I need someone in here that's a little more switched on." "Is that a compliment, sir?" I ask, more curious. "I need someone in here that I know is trustworthy. Management have a suspicion that contraband is coming in via this unit. They don't know how, and they don't know where. Just keep your eyes and ears open. Anything suspicious, okay?" I nod, we shake hands, and I leave the office. As I enter the officer station, Thelma gives me the eye and asks if everything's okay. I nod and check my emails. Con is out taking a couple of crooks for their medical appointments, and Barb is finishing up with the morning medication. When I get through my emails, I take a tier walk and pop my head into a couple of cells. I'm greeted in a couple by the occupants and stop for a chat with Gordon Luck to see how he's doing and ask him if he has any concerns. He says he is all good and looking forward to a visit with his daughter today. I nod and continue my rounds, then return to the station. Con returns a few minutes later, and I ask him about his holiday. He tells me about the amazing places he visited and how great it was to catch up with family. His face lights up when he mentions seeing his mom again. His wife and 2 children, his daughter Jane, who is 12, and his son Nick, 9, and very energetic, had an incredible time. They were especially excited to meet their extended family and were hoping to visit again during the summer holidays. He sounded so happy and looked totally refreshed. "And how long did it take to get back in the swing of things?" I laugh. He nods and smiles. "About 5 minutes after I walked through the gate." I know exactly what he means. Barb enters the station and offers us cuppas. Both Con and I ask for a coffee, and Barb goes to make them. Thelma joins us, and we continue our chit-chat. A few minutes later, Barb brings the cuppas, as well as a packet of chocolate chip cookies. We all take one and silently drink our coffees. "Medical to Glenelg East," comes over the radio. "Glenelg East receiving," I reply into my radio. "2 to pick up in medical," comes the reply, and Barb stands and nods, heading for the door. "On our way." The 3 of us finish our coffees, and Thelma checks the random cell searches. "Ready to see some dick, Con?" I ask, grinning. He laughs and stands. "Not something I missed, but let's go." I follow him, and we complete the searches with little fanfare. The crooks are obliging, and within 20 minutes, we finish. As we head back to the officer station, the call comes over the radio to prepare for lunchtime count. Thelma announces muster over the unit PA system, and we conduct muster. Half-hour later, control announces count correct, and we commence our afternoon run. About an hour later, the phone rings. It's the visit center asking for Gordon Luck. I call Gordon up, and Con offers to walk him there. Barb says she will, but Con insists. He heads for the door, giving us a salute. Thelma looks at the door and says, "I really like that man." I agree with her as I fill in the movement book. Not 2 minutes later, a frantic call comes across the radio. It doesn't sound like an officer, as the person is speaking freely and not in radio lingo. "I need help. There's an officer that's fallen down." My ears prick and Thelma takes out her radio. Before she has a chance to speak, Control answers the call. "This is Control. Where are you?" "I'm in Glen Elg East Yard. The officer is turning blue," the voice answers, sounding frantic. I am up and out of the station as soon as he mentions the unit name. I burst out the door and run down the path. In the distance, I see Khan lying face up on the ground with 3 prisoners standing over him. They don't appear to be attacking him, but rather trying to help him. All 3 are pushing 70, and one is tapping Khan in the face, trying to wake him. I raise my radio and yell, "Code Alpha, Glen Elg East, officer down, Code Alpha!" I reach Khan and see that his lips are blue. I feel for a pulse in his wrist, then on the side of his neck. I feel nothing. I immediately begin CPR. Not easy on a man easily tipping the scales at around 140 kilograms, and that weight on a frame only about 170 centimeters tall. There's a lot of insulation to get through. I frantically push down on his chest, anxiously looking around for help. Barb comes running up. She must have been a split second behind me and begins mouth to mouth. She's crying, tears spilling down her cheeks. I find out later that I'm also crying. I frantically continue pressing his chest, counting to try and keep time with Barb. I have no idea how long we were there for before staff began arriving. It felt like at least 5 or 6 minutes, but I was later told it was within a minute. I see the medical team running up the path, their trolley in front. I only stop when they push me aside, leaving me sitting on the ground with my arms sore and my own heart thumping hard as I desperately try to catch my breath. 2 of the nurses begin CPR, while a third takes a defibrillator out of the trolley. I have flashbacks to Stanley, and my stomach begins to heave. I fight to control it, and when I feel confident of hanging on to my lunch, I stand and go and hold Barb. She clings to me, holding me tightly. I hear the nurse shout clear and hear that familiar zap. I don't want to look. I don't want to see that convulsion that I saw so recently. She yells clear a second time, followed by the snap of electricity. In the distance, I hear an ambulance siren. It is still a long way off, but I know that officers will be manning every gate between here and there to ensure it arrives in the fastest possible time. There's a collective sigh of relief as the defibrillator begins to beep with a regular rhythm. The nurse checks his wrist and nods. Color slowly returns to Khan's lips and face, and his eyes begin to flutter. He tries to speak, mumbling something, but the nurses quieten him. He already has a bung in one hand, and one nurse is injecting something into it. He rests his head again as comments come from the officer standing around, telling him to stay strong and "you'll be fine." 5 minutes later, 2 paramedics and a stretcher come rushing up the path. They reach Khan and begin their duties, taking information from the nurses. Barb asks the soup, Jason, if she can accompany Khan in the ambulance, and the paramedics shake their head. "Not with a critical patient," one says. Jason whispers something in her ear and motions to one of the other officers. I don't need to hear to understand that he's asking Barb to be driven to the hospital in one of the prison vans. 6 officers help to lift Khan onto the stretcher, and a few minutes later, the ambulance exits the prison, full lights and sirens wailing. I cannot describe the feelings to you. All I know is that I sat down on the grass and cried. I cried freely and without shame. My body felt absolutely exhausted, and I was told later that my body would have been inundated with adrenaline. I sat in that yard for God knows how long. Eventually, Jason came and asked me if I was okay. I nodded, but wasn't so sure. He said that I should go home for the rest of the day and take it easy. Also, I should go and see my doctor the next day. I just felt cold all over. I remember shaking and Thelma giving me a hug. She, too, had tears in her eyes, and I just held her. Again, for how long, I cannot tell you. Eventually, I pulled myself together and drove home. I phoned the hospital and was told that Khan was in intensive care and they couldn't elaborate much more. I didn't sleep much that night, but I do remember holding my wife tight. It was not a good day. Tuesday, June 26th. Given the day off and went and saw my doctor. When I phoned Barb, she told me that Khan was still in intensive care, but stabilizing. The doctor said that he was showing some very positive signs at this stage. When I call into work, Jason tells me to take the rest of the week off. He said they can run the prison just fine without me for a few days. I laugh, thank him, and hang up. I stay home and relax. Wednesday, June 27th. I phoned Barb and she tells me that Khan is being taken out of intensive care and to a ward in the coronary care unit. He is making positive progress. She tells me that they're allowing visitors the next day, and I tell her I will definitely go and see him. Thursday, June 28th. Barb texted me a photo of Khan. He's sitting up in a hospital bed, giving a very toothy grin and a thumbs up. I grin, relieved at seeing my old friend smiling. My wife and I go and visit Khan and his family in the hospital later in the day. He looks very relaxed, apart from the wires and tubes hanging off him. His wife, Maria, looks tired, almost exhausted, and her eyes are bloodshot from crying. I hug her and whisper in her ear, "It'll be okay, Maria." She squeezes me tighter, acknowledging me. Khan shakes my hand, and I kiss him on the top of his head. "They tell me you pounded on my chest pretty hard, buddy. Maybe a little harder than needed, but it felt good to give you a couple. Time to cut down on the baklava?" He smiles. "Everything but the baklava." He snorts and laughs.